Okay, so before introducing our wonderful speakers, I would love for our board members who are here today to say a quick hello to our participants.
Hi all, I am Blanca Solis. I'm in the International Student Liaison. I am so happy to be here. So excited to meet all of you and see what's coming forward.
Anthony, would you love to go ahead?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony. I am a doctoral student in the Early Childhood Doctoral Program. I am the president of the council, and I am glad to be here. Special thanks to our speakers, Dr. Dedrick, Dr. Sherry, and Dr. DuBose. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I am Adriana Viana. I am with the Tesla program. I am a PhD candidate right now, and I'm the most young person in the group. No, young, I'm kidding. It's I'm the new person on the team because I just started today officially. I'm a treasure. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Adriana. And Khalifa?
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you for making this happen. Speakers, thank you very much. I'm the secretary of the Graduate Student Council, and I am a PhD student in the Curriculum and Instruction English Education program.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Now, we are very excited to welcome our speakers for today's session. Rather than me reading their bios, I would love for each of them to briefly introduce themselves and share a little about their background and experience with grant writing. So we would love to start with Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick.
Thank you. Again, I'm so honored to be invited to this group today. I've run across the paths of some of you, or we've met in other formats, but it's very kind of you to reach out to all three of us to ask us to be here today. I'm the Associate Dean for Research here in the College of Education, and I'm very new to the role. I've only been in this position since mid-July. So it's still very new to me, and I'm getting my footing, so to speak, kind of like you when you became a full-time or part-time graduate student and you realize, oh, this is a whole new world. That's kind of how I feel right now. This is a whole new world. Even though I've had a lot of experiences in research, I've participated as a PI and a co-PI in grant efforts, it's still, it's a different role, but it's one I think is aligned with my goals of supporting others. So that's essentially what my job is to support faculty and students in the research enterprise here in the College of Education. I've been a faculty member here at USF. I came here in a position for gifted education, and I began in 2003. So I tried to stop counting after 20 years, but you get the idea of how long I've been here.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Dedrick, for sharing, and congratulations for your new role.
Thank you.
Dr. Sherry, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. Michael Sherry, Associate Professor of English Education. You might be wondering, what is this English education professor doing here in the midst of esteemed colleagues who have titles that are directly relevant to research? And it might be because I'm in class with Tehran and Khalifa, but also maybe because I have experiences with writing and with thinking about the genre of research and of grant writing that I try to bring into all of my classes. And it's something I've talked about a lot. I when I came to the field of education as a doctoral student after being a middle and high school literature and drama teacher from New Jersey, and then working overseas in France, and finally coming to grad school, I felt like a very, capable, competent, successful writer. And suddenly there were these types of writing that I had never really had to do before, and they were very different from the kind of school writing that I was used to doing. And I felt just really frustrated, and there was no sort of explicit direction about that, and people were kind of busy doing it, but not really so much talking about how to do it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about this experience, and to hear from my colleagues as well about the processes and practices of grant writing. And thank you so much for the opportunity to participate and for arranging such a valuable support for graduate students and new researchers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sherry, for sharing your experiences. And lastly, Dr. Ross DuBose, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Ross DuBose. I'm honored to be here today. Unlike our other two speakers who are faculty members here, I'm on the staff side. So I'm assistant director in our Office of Research and Innovation, if I can speak. And I'm part of our Research Development Institute, which essentially means that I help our faculty members find out about grant opportunities and go after those opportunities. The RDI in particular is invested in working towards larger center scale grants and things like that. So interdisciplinary grants where multiple faculty members are working together is kind of our bread and butter, but we work on some smaller scale grants as well. As far as background goes, I have degrees in chemistry and pharmacology. So I've done the graduate student thing as well, where you guys are coming from. Once I got done with school, instead of continuing on as a researcher myself, I kind of made a career out of helping other researchers get their work done. I spent about a decade at a company called Research Square, which specializes in language editing and contractual services for journal editors, helping optimize the peer review process. So I learned a lot of skills there, including writing skills that I didn't learn nearly enough of as a graduate student. And then when the opportunity came open here at USF, I essentially was able to translate all those skills I've been learning on the publication end of things and start applying them to the grant proposal side of the process. So that's how I spend my day now, is helping people get grants.
Great. Thank you so much for those introductions. We are really looking forward to learning from each of you. So let's open up the discussion. To guide our conversation, we have created several themes, each with a few questions to help structure the conversation and keep it flowing naturally. And we would also love to hear from our participants. Please feel free to share your questions or comments in the chat at any time. So let's begin with general questions to set the stage. What types of grants are available for students and emerging scholars, and how do you decide which ones to apply for? And for those new to grant writing, what are some of the most accessible grants and helpful resources to start with? Dear speakers, whoever would like to begin, please feel free to jump in.
I'm happy to take a stab at it, but I think each of us will have something that we can add. At USF, in order to be someone who writes a grant and submits it, for the most part, you have to be a faculty member who's in typically a tenure earning line, although I think there are instances when we've had non-tenure line faculty also pursue grants. For students, the kinds of grants that I've seen come out are typically awards for dissertation research. So I think of AERA, for example. They typically have an annual competition for dissertation type projects where you maybe put in a little information about your proposal and where you want to go, and it's probably competitively scored given the scope of AERA. And then if it meets the criteria, whatever they may have for the grant or the award, then you may receive it. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that I know that's received it, but that doesn't mean we haven't had USF students receive it. It may be more assigned that I just don't remember things as well. Just like AERA, some professional organizations also have grants for their doctoral students. Again, typically around some dissertation project, but I recently came across one, I think, Michael, I'll let you talk about the one that came through for the student in English Ed to give you an example and the type of work it funded and the scope of the work. But I know in the field of gifted ed, for example, there are dissertation, like pre-writing your dissertation and seeking an award. And these may be smaller than the big $1 million grants that faculty here write, but there's kind of a range of opportunities available. The Esther Katz-Rosen grant is another one I'm familiar with through the American Psychological Association, or APA, and they may also have other grants that are specific to doctoral students. So that's one way for you to search and look for these, is look at some of the professional organizations and check what they offer for graduate students, or check with your major professor and they'll know a little bit more about some of these organizations and can at least connect you to their website and give you some other recommendations. But that would be a starting place for students, and we can come back around and talk about emerging scholars in a moment, but I'd like to ask Ross and Michael to jump in here.
I'd be happy to just jump in and supply an example that that you just referred to. And first to echo, I have my A, B, C answers here, and you mentioned the first two about talk to your advisor, to a senior colleague in your field, and then begin with your parent professional organization. And on that, one of our current English education doctoral students received a grant through the National Council of Teachers of English to support a particular area of research, which has to do with basically trauma-informed teaching. And so if you are someone who is interested in researching a particular topic that maybe is getting attention, or you have a certain kind of research project, there are also through the National Council of Teachers of English some grants that relate to a particular type of research, like ethnography, for example, where the person might need money to be able to spend a year or two in a classroom or in a setting to really be able to even do that kind of project. And those are grants that really are meant to support graduate students. And so I think that's a great place to start. Dulcie Hunter, who received that grant, was also the recipient of the other category of grant that I would suggest might be a good opportunity and a good experience, and that is a travel grant. And if you have done some research and you would like to present at a conference, AERA, the American Educational Research Association, and also professional organizations like the National Council of Teachers of English offer travel grants for graduate students and for emerging scholars who might not have the funds to otherwise to be able to get to the conference. The great thing about that is that you know exactly what you're asking for in the way of budget, and we can talk more about that later on. And I think that for me, the thing that's really useful about these is that, like Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick said, they may be small, but that's actually a really great place to start. And some of the small grants would allow you to recruit, participants, or to kind of get started on something that then you can propose later on to do something larger. And we can talk about that later. Thank you.
That's great. I have some specifics to add to that, but I think all the basic topics have been covered, which is great. First, I'm going to drop some links in the chat if that's okay. The first couple I'm going to drop here are through our Office of Graduate Studies here at USF. That's a very small team, but they maintain some really great resources. So they've got a couple of search tools there that I'll put in. And then I broke down quite a few grant opportunities that I think this group may be interested in. And these all fall under the sort of header of fellowships. And mostly, like Dr. Dedrick said, along the lines of dissertation completion fellowships. The students here may or may not know that most grants aren't awarded directly to a researcher or a faculty member. They're awarded to the college and then administered to the researchers themselves. Fellowships are a different type of grant that is actually awarded directly to a person, which includes graduate students and postdocs and other early career faculty members. So there's several there. Right at the top of the list is the one Dr. Dedrick mentioned, the AERA fellowship. The next most relevant one for this group, I think, is probably the National Academy of Education fellowship, which is in collaboration with the Spencer Foundation, which is a large private foundation that funds a lot of education research. I put the U.S. Department of Education School Ambassador Program on there. That one's a little different. It's not dissertation completion. That one's actually for practicing teachers who are in the field, which I know many people that are pursuing a PhD in education are already practicing teachers in the field. So if that describes you, that's a good one to take a look at. That involves going to Washington and speaking on behalf of teachers and things like that. The Student Fulbright Scholarship is on there. That's for going overseas and either teaching English overseas or learning about teaching foreign languages back here in the States once you return. The Florida Education Fund is a Florida-based, obviously, nonprofit group. They supply dissertation completion and other types of fellowships for underrepresented groups, minorities, and other groups. I put a couple on here that aren't education specific, but that you shouldn't overlook. The NSF GRFP, Graduate Research Fellowship Program, is, generally people think of engineering and things like that when you think of NSF, but the NSF does have an entire directorate focused on STEM education. So if you happen to be a STEM education graduate student, the EDU directorate at the NSF does award graduate research fellowships. And those are large, prestigious awards that you should look into. Similarly, for the NIH F31s, if you happen to be doing something that's involved with health, don't overlook that. And there's a couple of Department of Defense opportunities there as well. That last one is sounds intimidating, Strategic Defense Fellowship, but it's really a fellowship for people in all fields who may have an interest in public service in their future and politics. So look at that one as well. So beyond the specifics there, the ones that are most accessible, fortunately, are these fellowships. These graduate student fellowships and dissertation completion fellowships they're designed and they're intended for people who don't have a long history of writing grants. So they make them as straightforward and simple as possible. A full research grant proposal with all the ancillary documentation might be 150 pages by the time you're done. A graduate student research fellowship is typically 5 to 10 pages, depending on how many letters and things are required. So they're very approachable. They're very accessible. They typically consist of give me a page or two about what you want to do and a page or two about yourself, and then have one of your faculty members, your mentors, write a letter on your behalf speaking about your qualifications. They're really quite straightforward. So they're a good place to start. Even if you don't end up getting the fellowship, it's a good way to learn about grant writing and the requirements as you go along. I
Right.
think the rest will probably be saved for later.
Great. These are great points, really. Thank you for those insights. Based on what have been said, we would now want to talk about collaboration and partnership. So many students wonder whether to apply alone or with partners. How important are collaborations and what's the best way to approach mentors or outside organizations?
I went first last time, so I'm going to ask Ross or Mike to take it, and then I'll be the caboose.
I'll be happy to start because I'm guessing that my colleagues will have much more interesting things to say after me. So I think the short answer to the first one is yes. Definitely makes a grant stronger for all the reasons you would imagine. Spreads out the workload, different perspectives, different expertise, and that was something that I learned the hard way, trying to kind of do stuff as a graduate student and a beginning professor, because I knew that I had to. But as Dr. DuBose was saying, some of the ones that one might apply for are so long and involved that you really need a team of people, and you need to show that your team has the experiences and expertise that can do all the things that might be necessary. And the second question about the best way for students to reach out to people or groups outside the university who might want to team up on a grant, I have sort of learned about, I would say, mostly from one of my colleagues, Dr. Glenn Smith, who is really excellent at this. And through collaborating with him, I've met people outside of the university. And I think that the lesson there is when you collaborate, it also brings you into other circles with people who then might become your collaborators on other things. But I would say that going to conferences and meeting people in your field who are presenting or attending in the same sections or sessions is a great way to find collaborators from outside of your immediate institution. I'm collaborating with some folks right now from the University of Cambridge because I went to a workshop there and I met them there, and there are also folks from other parts of the US who are at that workshop. We all get on Zoom together. I learned from Dr. Glenn that you can read journal articles in your field and then just write to the authors of work you admire and say, hey, I think we're working on the same thing. Let's have a Zoom call or a correspondence. And again, if you join a professional organization that's local or national and you participate in its activities, you might also meet people with common interests who want to team up on a grant. That's what I got.
Thank you, Dr. Sherry, for sharing. It's very important, really. I also learned it newly that we should ask from professors that if we are interested in that topic, it's better to write and ask, can we work together? It's really great point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent overview. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say, but I'll ramble on here for a couple of minutes anyway. There, definitely try and partner with a professor. Like we talked about, there are fellowships that you can get on your own, but even for those, you're going to need a strong letter of recommendation. So you're going to need a partner to get a grant. And if there's nothing that says that you can't help develop a full-blown research grant and have the professor, the mentor you're working with, submitted as the PI. That is a relatively common thing and should be encouraged. There's a big push to have more graduate students funded on these research grants directly. So there are funding mechanisms as well to help pay for your time and the work you're doing. In terms of partnering with professors, one, just approach them, talk to them, let them know what you're interested in, and find out if they're interested as well. Often, if they're not interested, they'll go, this isn't my thing, but I know somebody, and that's, you can make connections that way. In terms of outside partners, I will caution you to be a little careful about that. If you're already working with a professor and you find out about an outside group who you think is a good idea, talk to the professor first. There's some intellectual property protection kind of things, so it's probably a great idea, but don't go talk to someone outside and then surprise your professor with bringing in a partner without discussing it with them first. Be a little diplomatic about it. And beyond that, I know we have an undergraduate research portal here at USF, and there's an effort to expand that and have more transparency and availability to the students about what all the researchers here are working on. So that is a bit of a work in progress, but that's another potential place to look for potential partnership ideas.
And I would add, I have a couple things to say about this. My own grant journey developed initially from having a seed grant at USF. So USF and most likely most institutions of higher learning, for you as a early career faculty member, will have internal awards. And sometimes these are very modest in size, but they're a great way for you to get your feet wet and do a couple of things that will then later help you down the road. But the first thing is, when you find out about the opportunity through your university, typically your Office of Research or the larger university will let people know that these are available. And these seed grants are important because sometimes you need a modest amount of money to be able to maybe work with the school and buy materials for a project you want to do and study how the students fare who receive this education with certain kind of materials, maybe compared to another group of students that gets a similar training but without the materials. And I'm just making up an example. Sometimes you need a little bit of cash flow to be able to invest in the materials you want. And these smaller grants are great ways to help you navigate that. So in my case, when I came in, I learned about one of these awards. And so at the time, I had started a collaboration. I had been invited, even before I got to USF, to work with a faculty member here, a community person who was involved with this collaborative group, and somebody that was in Orlando on second language learning among students who were gifted. And I thought it was an interesting idea. I was actually just happy to be invited to be a part of something. So, and it had to do with gifted education, which is my home. And I thought, hey, why not? Let me see. I have nothing to lose. And so we got some ideas brewing as a group. And I ended up taking some of those ideas, applying for this award, and then continuing with some projects using the award money. And then that group of people and I shifted authorship over several articles that we got published. So even just a little bit of money can go a long way in terms of getting products out there. The other point I want to make about this is those seed grants are useful because if you can spin out publications in reputable journals, that helps position you to then have experience managing a grant and showing that you can deliver on those deliverables. The more competitive grants that are typically outside of a university, like U.S. Department of Ed grants, they typically want to know that you have experience managing a grant. And more importantly, they want to know that you know what you're talking about when you're writing this grant. They need to know that you have some credibility. So you go into this thing And if you've got a few publications under your belt where you can say, in this work, we learned this, and this next project, we learned this. And if you can put together a project that really helps continue the work in some way or take it in one direction that you discovered through the initial work, you're more likely to have a favorable review because of your baseline of knowledge that you're bringing to the application. There are a few other variables that also make you more competitive, but I think it's important to note those training wheels for me here at USF were invaluable. And I had a mentor who was a faculty member, very active in research, who looked over my application, gave me feedback on it. And it wasn't even someone who ended up working on the project with me. But then that led to a much larger, over $1 million grant, maybe 5 years later. It wasn't immediate, but it just sort of has like, it's like a stone gathering moss. The more it rolls, the bigger it can get. And so again, going back to the collaboration question, I think working with a professor, if you're still a student, is a good idea, but make sure it's about an area that you're interested in, that this professor is also interested in, but always give them, I think, if you're comfortable working with them, the right of first refusal. It's sort of like the polite thing to do in education. This is who you're primarily connected to. Give them a chance to say, yeah, I'd love to work on this project. And I see the grant you're talking about. And sure, I'd be happy to support you if you want to work with me on putting this together. The other thing I'd say is I can't imagine going after a grant if I didn't already have an interest in the area, or at least some research accomplished in the area, because I think it would be hard to sell a potential agency on the fact that I could carry out the project. Going back to what Michael said, the longer I worked in research and the more collaborative the projects became, because as Michael indicated, your problems that you're working on become more and more complex. And in my case, I knew I didn't have all the answers to how to solve the problem of practice that I was really trying to address. And I needed other people. So that meant other thought partners in the same or an adjacent field, as well as measurement and research people. And once we had this team, then we were really well respected with more competitive agencies. And now I can't even imagine doing a really big grant, like $1 million or maybe $500,000 even, and higher, without a solid team. But it's something that you cultivate over time. It doesn't typically happen like overnight. You also need to feel people out and see how comfortable you are working with them. I've worked with other people here at USF, and we do a project or two that wasn't grant funded. And I realized they're great people and they do great research, but they're probably not a partner that I need to work with, because maybe there's just some personality issues, or the way they work kind of doesn't jive with the way I work. So there's a whole lot to bring to the conversation about, well, should you go after a grant? There has to be a whole lot more that happened before that point, I think, before you want to go down that road.
Great, thank you, speakers. These are really helpful points for understanding the process for us. Now, let's talk about the writing process itself. How do you think? What are some common pitfalls or myths students should avoid? And how can feedback help students improve their proposals?
I guess I'm up to go first on this one. Excellent. So the most common mistake I see with grant writing is writing a grant proposal like it was a research paper. And there are similarities, but there's some important differences as well. Grant proposals do need to be technically accurate documents. but they're also sales pitches. You have to convince the funding body that not only is this a sound idea, it's logical, it flows together, it has all the right, um, you know, all the right academic materials in it. It also has to be a good idea. It has to inspire that program officer. Because what's going to happen in front of those review panels is you've got to have a champion in that room, or your proposal is going to fall down. So you have to write in a way that is both technical and passionate. And that's a very difficult balance. It is a different skill from just writing a research proposal. You have to learn how to sell yourself and your work along with clearly explaining what can sometimes be very technical work. The other mistake I often see is kind of a more straightforward function of the process, and that's taking a failed proposal, turning around and submitting it to someone else without tailoring it to that new person's funding priorities. I've even seen things as bad as still leaving the name of the other funder in the proposal that gets sent on to the next place. That's a pretty bad red flag, and will very quickly get your grant thrown out. Myths. I don't know that there's that many myths around grant writing. I guess maybe a myth that grants are only for medicine and engineering, that sort of thing. There are certainly, as we've already talked about, plenty of grant opportunities available in education and humanities and the arts and business and really every field you can think of. There are both federal agencies and generally a plethora of private foundations that fund work. I think I'll leave off there.
I'm happy to go next, Michael, unless you want to.
Either way.
Okay. I think some common mistakes were myths. I think Ross made such a strong point there that your application and what you are putting together does need to be compelling, not just compelling to you. It has to be compelling to other people, especially people who don't work in your field or who are working in your field, but maybe are not your best friend. So you have to be kind of careful about figuring out who thinks this is compelling and how do I write something that is compelling. Essentially, if you have recent data that was collected in a methodologically sound way, that you can say, based on this data and this data, there is a need for blank, you're already starting out in the right direction. The work I've done with a group of colleagues has been around stress and coping of high school students who take AP or IB courses. So those are accelerated courses in American high school, and IB is certainly worldwide. Most funding agencies don't want to fund kids that are perceived to be doing well already academically. People don't see that that's a problem. And we actually do work on positive psychology, so we don't like to make it sound like people have problems. That's like the opposite of what we stand for. But we had to make peace with that if we wanted to get the money. So we had to problematize what this group is experiencing. And we have data from surveys that we've collected where we know that most ninth grade students find the transition from middle school to high school to be very stressful, particularly academically. And some of them know how to handle that stress, but many don't. So we're able to just start right there with that premise and then talk about what we want to do about that premise in our grant project. One thing I've learned about grant writing is always follow exactly what the guidelines are. Don't skimp if you can't. You have to address every area that is in a call for a grant. You may have to be very succinct in some sections. And as you can tell from the way I talk and how slowly I talk, that's probably a sign that it's harder for me. I just am of the mind, I'll get to everything down on paper first, and then I'll worry about compressing it. And so I don't put the pressure on myself to have something perfected the first time I try to put it pen to paper, which I think is another common mistake. I think there are some people who approach grant writing as, oh, there's a grant that's due in 2 weeks. Great, I have 2 weeks. I'll squeeze this in and get it out. 2 weeks is not nearly enough time for a seriously competitive project. Most of the big money grants that I've worked on, we knew even before the grant came out that the grant would eventually be coming out. And we started working 8 months or a year in advance. And that sounds crazy, but it was actually very effective because we had our team and we really thought through issues and we kicked them around with each other and we were critical friends with each other. And then we said, okay, what are we really going to have to do? So I think a common mistake is that people don't give themselves enough time to draft these things and really polish them up. I think the other thing that people make a mistake around is if they submit something once and then they don't get it funded, they may have their feelings hurt and wander off into a corner and put that grant down and say, well, that was when I tried to write a grant and it didn't work, so I'm going to go do other stuff in my career, which you should know, most people don't get the grant the first time around. I know somebody here, one of my collaborators, she submitted 4 times. She always took the feedback that the agency gave her, but she would sit down with it and re-strategize and send that puppy right back out the next time it came out. And eventually that 4th try, she got it. And I'm somebody really who, if you told me no, I'd say, okay. And I'd just kind of scurry off. You'd never see me again. But working with her, she is very persistent. She never gives up on anything. So that's another secret I have to pass on to you is, if at first you don't succeed, try again, because we have evidence that that can work. And feedback, if you are fortunate enough to make it to a stage in the review process where you can receive feedback, use it just like you would receive feedback on a manuscript that you sent in. Essentially, manuscripts are nicer in this way, but typically you get direction on what it is that's going to make it better. Follow that advice. Whatever the grant review process is and they give you feedback, take the feedback and apply it. Don't decide they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know your field. You can go through all that early denial, but then you need to make peace with it and say, all right, well, there's probably something here I can use that they gave me, and that will help this whole process get better. I think the other thing that students should do to improve their proposals is take some either coursework or professional development on grant writing. And I came across a U.S. Department of Ed free grant writing workshop. I think I put it, here it is. If you go into this Manage Your Grant, it has some little videos that can help you. It's a starter place. You might learn a lot more. You might learn a little bit less than other opportunities, but at least go and try to get some training from professionals. Or if you hear about grant writing workshops on a campus, go to them. If they're, if you can, if you're allowed to sign up, go. It's not going to hurt you to hear what experts in writing grants say about putting them together.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick, for sharing grant workshop with us and your insights. It's really great. Dr. Sherry, do you want to add on that?
Just briefly, because I think my colleagues have really covered it. Like a good English teacher, and for anyone who's had class with me, you know that I like a good mnemonic device. And so to summarize, I'll say that I think the comments about these are all P's, preparation in advance is really good. And also be prepared to fail a lot and keep going. Reading the prompt carefully, so the second P, and making sure that you're really addressing the guidelines. Third is the problem, being able to really describe the problem or opportunity of your research. And here I think that it really helps to use phrases that researchers that you see in research a lot, but that you don't see in other types of writing. I'm putting some in the chat. Like research remains to be done on this, or opportunities remain to study this, or prior research has made it possible now to study this, because you're really pointing to the gap or the opportunity or the significance of your work. And then the process and the procedures. There are so many boxes to check and things to do for grants. I had no idea, and I tried to apply on my own for things because I didn't realize that there are whole offices and teams of people who know how to do this. And so email with someone from sponsored research or contact one of my two colleagues who can connect you with those folks. And I think one of the reasons that is really important is that if you're like me, and you're not used to having any money, it's very hard to imagine what you might need it for in a project. But the folks in those in sponsored research or the Office of Research, directed research can tell you how much would it cost if you're a beginning professor to hire a graduate assistant, or how much would it cost to get transcription services, or and how do you put that into the budget? And like Dr. DuBose said earlier, like how might the money be shared, among different universities or between you and the university if you're trying to get it to do something. And these are things that I knew absolutely nothing about and could never do. So I think those are mistakes that you don't want to make in trying to kind of do all of that yourself. I think regarding feedback, the really hard thing about grants is that they're not like journal articles, and you don't have a chance to revise and resubmit. But it is really useful to look at the reviewer feedback. And with my colleague, Dr. Glenn Smith, we've applied for the same grant 3 times. So I'm very happy to hear Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick's story about her colleague in the 4th time, hoping that'll be the charm for us. I can see each time that the feedback we've gotten for this big NSF DRK-12 grant is better, more positive. So I know that it's working, and I think life is about failing and learning from your mistakes. So pay attention to the feedback and use it to make your proposal better. But also share your failure. This is very counterintuitive. We don't like to talk about what didn't work. But the more you talk about that, the more you help other people to make their work better. Talk with the people in your circle, form a writing group, share your writing with them, and then talk about what didn't work and how you're working on making it better, and use that together as a way to improve. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Sherry. You already touched some part of our next theme. We talked about some, because we know that rejection is part of the process, and we wanted to ask, like, what steps should students take if their proposal is not funded? We already talked some about this. Maybe you would like to share a quick story about a grant experience that taught you something valuable, good or bad.
Is it my turn to go first since I just went last?
Sure, can be.
I'm okay to do that. So I will share a story about a time that it went well and the time that it went badly. Well, in collaborating with my colleague, Dr. Alexandra Panos, on a Spencer grant, and also with a colleague, Dr. Jared Rosello from the College of Arts and Sciences. And I think what went really well there was that we had really complementary interest and expertise, and it really clicked. And we were able to divide up the writing, but because we were collaborated well and we were so much on the same page, by the end, I couldn't even remember which sections had been written by whom because it had sort of melded really well. And so I think that what Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick said earlier about finding the right group of people and really just sort of honing your collaboration is something that I learned from that experience. A story about a time when it went really badly. I applied for a small internal research grant as a graduate student of the type that Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick mentioned earlier. And I asked for funding for one semester to analyze some data that I had generated. And the reviewer's feedback was just devastating. The problem wasn't clear enough, the citations weren't current enough, procedures weren't specific enough. They thought I was trying to do too much and that I was going to be overwhelmed with data when they were totally right. And so I learned from that you really have to make the problem or opportunity clear, make the literature current, make the procedures specific, and don't just try to make it something very bounded and very clear and a good chunk. And so those are the experiences that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Dr. Sherry, for your experience sharing.
I have a good and a bad also. So after I wrote that initial seed grant, that was probably my first year here at USF. I had an interest and I was doing research at the time, focusing on a group of adolescents who had a form of autism. And the research was a fantastic experience. And actually, a doctoral student worked with me who knew a whole lot more about it than I did. And we had a wonderful data collection process and experience. And I wrote a paper about it, and it got accepted to a conference. And I thought, well, maybe I'm onto something here. I should keep pursuing it. So I wrote for a small, like a mid-range grant, maybe $30,000 for an autism grant. And it fell pretty flat. I probably got kind of a response that was, thanks for applying. We wish you luck in the future on your other efforts. So I didn't really get any feedback. And I just kind of had to scratch my head and say, yeah, I didn't really know what to do, how to do, but I was just taking a stab. And so I thought, well, okay. But I never went back to it again. And I actually didn't continue to do that work. And I never turned that paper into a manuscript. That kind of became a very dormant experience, which is unfortunate because I think there's actually a lot to write about with the group I studied. However, I had other research interests also going at the same time. And what I thought was after I had mid-tenure, my dean at the time said, Elizabeth, you're doing great. It looks like the college committee has recommended that you be sure to pursue some grants. And so I was, past my third year or in my third year, and I only had a couple more years left. So I thought, well, I better do what the committee says, or, I don't know if I'll be around here after a couple years. So a grant came out in my field of gifted education, and I was familiar with this grant, and I started to put it together over the summer, and I had a couple of really good collaborators, and I sent it in, and it didn't get funded. But the funding agency let me know that while it wasn't funded, they funded the first 6 that were scored highest, and mine was the 7th. So I didn't get it. And I was like, oh, got it? So close. Well, then about a year later, I get this email from the U.S. Department of Ed talking about a meeting to get together to talk about this grant. And I thought, did I miss something? Is there a letter I missed in my inbox? Well, apparently they took all the money that was allotted for the next year, and instead of having a new competition, they just funded the next 7 grants that were, ranked in that order. So yes, Michael, I was completely shocked and in a huge panic. By this time, I had been tenured though, so it actually happened at a better time for me in my career. I think I'm sure I would have lived through it fine as a tenure-earning faculty member to have this million-something dollar grant, but I was actually relieved to have been tenured and not have to worry about scrambling and doing everything else. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise.
Thank you, Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick. That's really great story.
That's amazing. I've heard of some opportunities where people have been re-invited, but never any where they just funded the next few in the line. That's incredible. Okay, I want to back up a step. Dr. Shaunessy-Dedrick gave us some resources for writing workshops, and USF actually has some resources as well. So I wanted to make sure I share those. Put them in the chat here. The first, I'll plug our Office of Graduate Studies again. They do free writing workshops for graduate students. You should definitely be aware of those. The second, if you want to dive a little deeper, the Research Development Institute does a summer grant writing workshop. So this is an 8-week intensive program that has a micro-credential. It's a lot. It's faculty facing. It's designed to really, really dive in and let you learn everything you need to know about writing a grant. It is open to graduate students. It's not free, but we do have some scholarships and things available. So if you're interested, reach out. And there's the last link there has some of our external invited presenters. That includes program officers for some of these funding opportunities. So browse through that list and see if there's a funder you're interested in, and listen to what they say about their own programs, because that's gold. That's the stuff it's sometimes hard to find out. So that's part of the reason we curate that research. Okay. In terms of proposal feedback, so first there's good news. So in cases where funders allow resubmissions of proposals, the funding rate is typically 3 times higher than the initial submission rate for those. So if you look at the NIH and some of the others that allow official resubmissions and they track it, it's a much, much higher funding rate. And the key to that is to make sure you go through the reviewer feedback and address every single comment they make, which can be exhausting and take forever. And some of it you may disagree with, and it's okay. You don't have to agree with everything they say. You don't have to do everything they say. But if you're not going to do what they say, you need to take the time to write out why you're not doing that so that the peer reviewers understand it. And typically you get 3 types of feedback when you get feedback from a peer review panel. The first one will indicate to you that the reviewers did not understand your idea. The thing you had in your head and the thing that they wrote about after reviewing your paper are not the same thing, right? You said, I'm gonna monitor zebras in Africa, and they're talking about whales in Antarctica, right? It just complete miss. And those are grant writing issues. So if you get those kind of comments, you need to go back through your proposal and see where you've said things that are unclear. Figure out why they came to those missed conclusions. And going to grant writing workshops and things like that can help with that. The second type of comment you're likely to hear is there's a budget issue or resources. They don't think you have the qualifications to do what you're saying. Those are addressable things. You can change the scope if they think you're going to spend too much money or not enough money. That happens sometimes too. You've proposed to do all this and you only asked for this much money. We don't think you can do that. So adjust it, go after a bigger opportunity, add more money. The other way you can address it is to add partners to the program. If they say you're missing expertise, go find someone with that expertise, invite them to join you in the project, make it a more collaborative project, and go back in with a team that fits what the reviewer's expectations are. The last one is the reviewers point out scientific issues with your proposal. These are not misunderstandings. These are actual issues with the science you've laid out, and those hurt. You think you've got it perfect. They come back and say, this doesn't work. So those do hurt, but this is the good stuff. This is what you really want out of peer review, because this is how you make your proposal better. I like to think of them as gifts from the peer reviewers, because the peer reviewers aren't doing this to be mean to you. It feels like that sometimes, but they're there because they want to make the science better. And if they're doing their job, and most of them do a good job at this, they're going to offer you suggestions about how to make your proposal better or a way to approach it differently. So really take those to heart, address them point by point. Don't get defensive, don't dismiss them. Like Dr. Dedrick was saying, he just take it in, see what they want, and figure out the ways that you can best address it. Story, I'll tell a very short, and I won't get into the details about, but there's a lesson to this story, so I'll tell the short version. So one of the best proposals I've ever read went in and came back with one of the absolute worst scores I've ever seen. This was a well-known researcher. I won't say who it is or really even much about it, but well-known researcher, excellent writer. And this, if you had just read this proposal, you would think this is a slam dunk. This is going to be funded no matter what. The issue with it was it didn't quite match the funding opportunity. It's the funding opportunity. It was after COVID. They wanted a very specific analysis of a health metric. And instead, the researcher had proposed sort of a broader programmatic approach that just wasn't quite what it asked for. And they got absolutely slammed by it by every single peer reviewer. So the lesson is read the opportunity very carefully and make sure what you're proposing is in line with that opportunity, that ask. And if you're not sure, reach out to the program officer and talk to them ahead of time. Tell them what your idea is and find out from them if they think it fits. Because if they think it fits, they're going to be in the room when the peer reviewers are talking about this. And they're going to go, I remember this one. This is why I think it fits. But if you haven't had that conversation, then you are likely just wasting your time, even if you've written just the perfect proposal. So pay attention to what you're applying to. It's just as important as what you're applying, the project you're applying with.
That's great story, Dr. DuBose, really. And thank you for sharing the amazing resources. We should definitely add it to our newsletter. It's really helpful. And as we are coming closer to the end, for wrap up, we would like to ask, what's one piece of advice you wish you had heard before writing your first grant?
I've got an easy one, and Dr. Dedrick already mentioned this. Start early. Writing a grant takes a long time. Some of these fellowships we've been talking about are much shorter, but I've actually got some data here. The NSF surveyed their applicants, and those survey results suggested that people who were funded on the proposals spent an average of 120 hours working on that proposal, spread out over about 90 days before the submission deadlines. That's for a research proposal. That's bigger than the fellowships we've been talking about most of the day today. But get started early. The earlier you know about it and start thinking about it, the more complete a proposal you can put together.
And I'll add, start small and collaborate. I think one of the best places to start would be for like a travel grant that gets you to a conference where you can meet other people with whom you might then work on something larger. And, it has like very, very narrow constraints, and you know exactly what the purpose of the grant is, and you know exactly what you're asking for, registration, accommodation, stuff like that. And it's really easy to get experience doing that. And then you have the opportunity to meet people you can collaborate with.
I'd say the advice I'd share is make sure you follow the directions. And this sort of goes back to what both Ross and Michael have said. Follow the directions, know what you're talking about. So present yourself as an expert in something and have the data to show that you're an expert in something. I know that's two pieces of advice, but I think that's it. And also, I think Michael had also suggested this. Make sure you get a few readers to take a look at early and mid stage and even final drafts so that you can, that's where you're going to get feedback. So the sooner you can work on it and give the people who you want to provide feedback to you time, the more time they have, the more likely it is they'll be able to actually read it and give it back to you and provide thoughtful feedback. But if your grant is due on Monday and you ask them on Friday to read it, it's probably not a realistic request of somebody else. And when they're reading under the gun, they may not actually be able to process the ideas as well, knowing they have very little time to give you feedback for you to turn it around.
Thank you. These are really great advice, and I hope that it shed light to our participants' way. Now, I would love to open the stage for participants. If you have questions or comments, please unmute yourself, or you can post your question to the chat.
Thank you, Turan. I think Sandra has a question. Sandra, do you want to tell her your question?
Oh, he answered it already. I was just wondering about, I'm writing a very small, my first grant, $10,000. And I didn't know if I should include citations because it's based on PBIS. And so, but he answered it, and yes, I should. Because when he's made the comment of don't make it look like a research paper, I became scared that maybe I shouldn't use citations, but thank you.
And the way you should cite your
Thank you
research
so much.
papers.
This has been so informative. I really appreciate it.
Very welcome. Instructions
Thank you,
for
Sandra.
references are usually in the request for proposals as well. So read your directions carefully. That'll usually tell you what you need.
Dear participants, if you have any
In this
other
particular
questions.
case, it didn't mention whether I should or not, so I didn't know if the default was to use it. I only have 300 words, and I didn't know if I wanted to use it up with in-text citation.
If you only have 300 words, if it's a small foundation proposal, it may be understandable to leave it off. But if the whole logic of your proposal hinges on that knowledge that exists, you probably want to at least cite that one paper.
Thank you, speakers, for the wonderful experiences and advices. I want to find out, specific to the College of Education, maybe first, then maybe we move on to the broader USF community, if there are specific fellowship or grant opportunities for students who have reached dissertation area for doctoral students.
That's a great question. I don't remember hearing about them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I think Ross posted the USF Graduate School, and that page would have, if there are such opportunities available, that would be one place where that would be posted.
Yes, there are several on there.
Great, thank you, Anthony, for asking. Yes, Adriana, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this. This session is very informative. One thing that Dr. Sherry say, we are used to work with no money, and then you need to justify, okay, I want to use this grant opportunity to help with my research. So then I come up with a budget that is 1,000, but the grant is 500. So I'm kind of like, I don't know what would I focus to think about what is more appealing, what would be more interesting for the grant reader to be like, okay, this is an interesting, a fair, good use of the money. I don't know exactly what to select on my list of options. You guys have any advice?
I would say this is where it's time to ask for help from someone like David Doyle or Grace Wang or, Dr. DuBose in an office where they are just experts at helping make your budget work and figuring out, what to prioritize, how to frame it in a way that you get what you need, because that's not my strong suit. I'm an English guy, not a numbers guy. And so grateful to have a lot of really good support at USF for that. And I would imagine that for graduate students too, that support is available.
Yeah, Grace and David are both incredible, and they represent the College of Education very well. And I'm happy to help as well. But I would say in general, you would look for a way to piece apart your idea. And if that's not possible, you may just want to look at a different opportunity, because the project fitting the opportunity includes the budget and the scale and what can be funded there. So if the minimum you can do is that $5,000, then you're wasting your time going after a $500 opportunity. Find one that's $5,000 or more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking, Adriana. Thank you for sharing your experiences, dear speakers. Okay, so as we come to the end of today's session, I want to sincerely thank our amazing speakers for sharing their time, experiences, and insights with us. And I also want to thank everyone who joined. Your participation and engagement really made this event meaningful. And on behalf of Graduate Student Council, we appreciate your support and hope you found today's discussion helpful and inspiring. And one last thing, if you haven't registered yet on DuBose Connect, please take a moment to do so and follow us on social media. Thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I learned a lot from your questions and from listening to my colleagues.
I would say
Thank
the
you for
same.
coming.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed hearing from Ross and Michael as well.
Same, and
It was
please
really
reach out if
helpful.
there's any follow-up questions or anything like that. Always happy to answer questions by email.
Thank you, Dr. DuBose. You should definitely do.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.